Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. I'm going to start today by saying that in my videos, I seem to get one kind of comment over and over again, and it goes something like this. Why don't you just give up on Marvel and DC already? Why do you keep putting these videos out there about them? Why don't you just give up on them, move on, and then you can stop complaining? And the thing is that I don't fault anybody for making that statement. However, that statement proceeds upon a false assumption. And that assumption is that this channel is about comics. And although I talk about comics in almost all of my videos, it's not actually about comics. I created this channel to talk about heroes. And as I always say, that's why this channel was called the Fourth Age. Because in Greek mythology, the Fourth Age is the Age of Heroes. So as long as my channel is going to be around, I'm going to be putting out videos about Marvel and DC and the lunacy that has taken over both of those companies. Because in part, a small part, I would say that I want to call this behavior out because these companies disrespect the heroes that they've been given to work with. And they do this in their storytelling. And they simply do not respect either the heroes that they've been given nor their legacy. But that's just a small part. The really big part of why I talk about them so much is because both Marvel and DC have been taken over by people who hold one kind of ideology. From the top right down to the bottom, everybody holds one kind of ideology. And both of these companies have made that ideology the center of all of their stories. And the thing is that when you lay out that ideology and put it into practice, it tries to destroy the idea of hero itself. And I will certainly always fight against the attempted destruction of the traditional idea of hero, that idea that has accompanied Western civilization for a minimum of 3,000 years. And today, I think I can positively show the attempted destruction of the idea of hero within these companies by going over an article that I found. So, the article that I found is about Willow Wilson. And she is a former writer for Marvel, and she is a current writer for DC. She co-created Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel, over at Marvel, and she now writes Wonder Woman for DC. And very briefly, I'll have to say that I haven't covered an article in a while. When I look at an article, I look at it just like I look at the philosophy that I talk about. I talk about it in terms of political theory. And I don't just look at what is said itself. I also look at the structure of why and how it was said. And I think this is extremely important to do because in this clown world of doublespeak that we live in, where people are trying to constantly convince you of an argument by using irrational and illogical means like the fallacies of appeal to fear, or appeal to emotion, or appeal to ignorance. When we live in that kind of world, it is very advantageous to look at anything both in terms of what is said and what is actually meant. And you can tell the difference by looking at what is said as compared to how implementing the ideas stated actually play out in real life and in logical assessment. And that's the political theory way of looking at things, and that's the way I do things. So this article, as I said, is about Willow Wilson, and it is put out by Princeton University. And before you even begin, you have to ask the question, why is Princeton University putting out an article about a woman who writes novels and comic books? Well, they put it out there because they invited her to do a lecture at Princeton. This woman who writes novels and comic books. And again, you're probably asking the question, why would they have this woman talk at Princeton University? Wouldn't they have more important people to come and give lectures? Well, I'll answer that question in just a moment. So first we have to look at the little preamble that they give to this article itself, explaining who put together this lecture series that she's participating in, and who put together also this article, and of course the title of the article itself. By the way, I've put the link in the description for this article if you wish to go read the entire thing yourself. Now, the title of this article is Comics writer and novelist G. Willow Wilson talks about faith, fiction, and justice. And the little preamble talking about the series of lectures says this: the series invites prominent artists, activists, and scholars to discuss Islam and its place in the modern world with attention to the lived experience of intersecting identities. The event, brought together by many campus partners, includes the Lewis Center for the Arts, Campus Conversations on Identities, Princeton University Public Lectures, and the Carl Fields Center for Cultural Understanding and Equity. Now, right away, you might have noticed that one word pops up in this little preamble twice, and it also pops up in various ways throughout this article. It is the word identity. And why is this popping up? Well, because these people at Princeton are promoting identity politics. And if you look up the other entity attached to the last of that statement that I read, the Carl Fields Center for Cultural Understanding and Equality, it is also a center that promotes identity politics. You can see it on their website. So I should explain for 1 second what exactly identity politics is. Briefly, it is a way for people to weaponize their identity in order to gain political power. And it plays out like this. Identity politics is set upon the idea that there are only two kinds of people in the world. There are the oppressed and there are the oppressors. And what the oppressed need to do is take their entire being and center it around one piece of their identity, the piece of their identity in which they are most oppressed. And that can be pretty much anything. It can be your religion, it can be your race, your skin color, your gender, anything. And once the person takes their whole being and centers it around this identity marker, that person then goes out and naturally finds other people who have done the same and have centered their being around a very similar identity marker. And those people will then join together, and that joining together will soon, hopefully, in their minds, become a movement, because all of these people, they are marginalized, because they are oppressed, and they have very little power. So the point is for these people to take their very little power and join it together with similar people, so that that little power grows and grows as their movement grows, and they finally have enough power to enact some political change. And when you look at it that way, it doesn't sound exactly like a bad thing. But then again, you have to look at the origin of the ideas behind identity politics. And here's where I will analyze things as a political theorist, because I'm sure someone in the comments is going to say that these two ideas that I am going to connect do not connect together philosophically, but I connect them together in the real world application of them through political theory. And so if you look at the origin of identity politics, it would have grown mainly out of the ideas of the Frankfurt School. And the Frankfurt School was a group of intellectuals that got together in Germany in the 60s. They were all Marxist communists, and they admitted to themselves that the Marxist revolution wasn't going to happen as was previously planned. So they had to come up with new ways of repackaging the old Marxist ideas for a modern audience so that they could restart the revolution. And one of those ways was to take the old language of the lower class and the upper class and change it to the new language of the oppressor and the oppressed. And this is the very basis of identity politics. It is set firmly on the idea that the world is made up of the oppressor and the oppressed. And modern conservative commentators would label identity politics as part of cultural Marxism. Now, this explains exactly why Princeton University is talking to G. Willow Wilson, because all of these entities at Princeton University, the Campus Conversations on Identities, the Carl Fields Center, and the lecture series that concentrates on experience and intersecting identities, all of these entities are focusing on identity politics. And G. Willow Wilson also focuses on identity politics. I did a video on an interview of G. Willow Wilson done by the New York Times. And in that video, I showed that she does indeed focus on identity politics. And further, she was joined at the hip when she was at Marvel with Sana Amanat. And I've done many videos showing that Sana Amanat is clearly coming from a position of identity politics. And to show this further, let's look at the character that both of those women created together, which is Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel. Kamala Khan is the leader of two separate groups of heroes in the Marvel universe. One of them being the group of heroes that has no name under the Marvel Rising banner. And they have both shows and comic books that come out under the name of Marvel Rising. Now, in the podcasts from Marvel itself, when talking about the construction of these shows and these comic books, they stated quite clearly that the entire show is built around Kamala Khan and her journey of self-discovery to find her identity. And then they go on to say in smaller ways how and why she is doing this, and how and why she is doing this is because of identity politics. And what more, every other hero that is in Marvel Rising, and there's at least half a dozen others, they're all picked quite specifically to complement the character of Kamala Khan. And each of those smaller characters has a journey of self-discovery for their identity themselves, but it only occurs in so much as that journey of those smaller characters is a reflection of the journey of Kamala Khan. Again, this is all straight out of Marvel from their podcasts and their statements put out about Marvel Rising. So we can easily see that this character that was co-created by G. Willow Wilson and is being pushed again and again today through Marvel Rising over at Marvel is a character that was created and is currently sold under the guise of identity politics. And understanding that G. Willow Wilson is talking about identity politics in all that she says is the key to understanding why and how she says what she says. So this article, as the title indicates, has G. Willow Wilson talking about faith, fiction, and justice. Now I'm going to concentrate on the justice part because I want to talk about heroes and show how what she says tries to destroy the traditional idea of hero. So I'm going to skip over the faith and fiction part because there's only really one statement from there that I will be using today. And it's G. Willow Wilson telling artists that they need to work with their truths. Not with the truth, but with their truths. And then she goes on from that to talk about the different kinds of narratives that they can employ under their truths. So let me just read a little bit from this article. It says as follows. In creating this character, Kamala Khan, Wilson explained that it was an intentional choice to make Kamala live in the real world, down to locating Kamala and her family in Jersey City, removed from the epicenter of the action in the Marvel Universe, which is Manhattan. It was also important for Wilson that Kamala had a physical power set that wasn't esoteric and didn't cause massive Earth-level events. She has to have a solid handle on what the situation is on the ground, what entities are at play, and what political things are going on, she says. When you go small instead of huge, more people can see themselves in that situation because it is much closer to our situation, Wilson added. Wilson is now writing for DC Comics' Wonder Woman. In the story, The Just War, she said she wanted to add nuance about what happens to a character when dropped into messy, politically entangled situations. She wants to fight on the right side, but doesn't know what the right side is, and even if her presence would be good, Wilson said. Wilson said that the first question should always be if the character can make a positive difference. So, having quoted the article there, I want to take what is said and break it down. And I'm going to break it down under an idea. I'll give you a mental picture because I think this is the easiest way to understand it. Let's take a superhero. Let's say Daredevil. If you don't know Daredevil, you can think about it in terms of Batman. So you have Daredevil. He's on the rooftops of Hell's Kitchen patrolling for the evening. And he knows what's going on. And suddenly he sees someone being mugged. So what does Daredevil do? Well, you and I and normal people would say, well, he's a superhero. He jumps into action and he stops the mugging from occurring. But that's not what is supposed to happen in the mind of G. Willow Wilson. In the mind of G. Willow Wilson, Daredevil has to look first at the situation on the ground, secondly at what entities are at play, and then has to look at what political things are going on. So you have Daredevil. He's on the rooftop. He's been patrolling all night. He knows the situation in Hell's Kitchen for the night. He sees this mugging occurring, so he knows the entities that are at play. Should he not just jump in and stop this mugging from occurring? No. First, he has to think about the political things that are going on. He has to think about the social and political aspects of what he is just about to do. Or, in other words, he has to apply identity politics to this situation and see, as Wilson says, if his presence would even be a good thing. And he would have to think about things in the following terms. He should say to himself, well, let's look at the person who's being mugged and the person who is doing the mugging. If the person being mugged is a white person, well, white people are automatically oppressors. And if the person doing the mugging is not a white person, well, that person is just trying to redress the balance of their oppression, because the only reason the white person has anything to take away to begin with is because he stole it from people who are non-white. And therefore, the non-white person mugging the white person might actually be doing something good. Or he should possibly think about it in these terms. Should I interfere with this mugging to begin with? Am I marginalizing the identity and the experience of the person who is doing the mugging? If I am doing so, I should not stop this mugging from occurring. Now, I'm going to stop there and say that I know that I have a few people in my audience who don't actually read comics. And those people are probably thinking to themselves, well, I'm just being dramatic. I'm just being hyperbolic, and I'm taking a situation that doesn't actually occur and exaggerating it so that I can prove my point. However, I am here to say that no, I am not. This is the actual way that comic books are written today. This is what is supposed to happen in the minds of the quote-unquote heroes before they jump into action. And let me prove that for you here with one of the groups that is led currently by Kamala Khan. And that group is called the Champions. The Champions were built upon this exact idea. The Champions originally were basically junior Avengers, and the Avengers took them with them to stop a catastrophe. And once the catastrophe had been averted, the Avengers said to the junior Avengers, okay, it's time to go. And the junior Avengers, all young quote-unquote heroes, said, no, hold on, wait a second, we can't just leave. You're not considering the social and political aspects of what we had just done. We have to fix all of that. And the Avengers looked at them and said, no we don't. We're just heroes. We don't do that. And so these junior Avengers decided to break off from the Avengers and start their own team, which would do exactly that. The team would look at the social and political aspects of all of their actions before they occurred and after they occurred. This is the entire reason for the existence of this group of characters. And to show you exactly what I mean and how this plays out, I'll go over one of the storylines of the Champions from last year. One of those storylines was that the Champions basically stumbled upon this supervillain who is trying to take over the world. The supervillain had a long-term 200-year plan to take over the planet by reducing the temperature of the globe and using that reduced temperature to gain power. And when the Champions learned that this is what he was doing, they literally had to stop in their tracks and ask the question, should we stop this supervillain who's trying to take over the world? Because on the one hand, he is trying to take over the world, but on the other hand, he is actually cooling the entire globe, which means he's fighting global warming. So do we stop him or do we leave him be? And this is the actual question that they stopped and asked themselves. And they talked about it so much that they didn't actually come up with an answer, because another superhero team came and started fighting with the supervillain. And what did the Champions do? Well, they literally threw themselves between the superhero team and the supervillain to stop the superheroes and wag their moral finger at them and say, no, you can't do that. You can't just jump in here and attack this guy guy because you're not thinking about the social and political aspects of what you are about to do. You need to stop. And the other heroes said, get out of our way. And the whole point of this storyline was to show the reader that the old heroes who just jump into action are doing wrong. And the champions who stopped in the middle of a so-called battle and started having a discussion about whether or not they should stop this supervillain from taking over the world were actually doing the correct thing, because they were thinking about the social and political aspects of what the supervillain was doing, which was cooling down the globe and fighting global warming. This is literally a storyline from a comic book from last year. And this type of storyline plays out over and over again in comic books today. We just have to look at the other example, which is right in front of us, which is the storyline that G. Willow Wilson wrote for Wonder Woman called The Just War. As she says in this article, Wonder Woman finds herself in the middle of a situation where we have two sides in a war. And Wilson says she wants to fight on the right side, but doesn't know what that side is, and even if her presence would be good. And then the author adds, Wilson said that the first question should always be if the character can make a positive difference. So you have Wonder Woman. She's in the middle of a literal war, and she has to stop and ask the question if her presence is going to make a positive difference. And of course, this positive difference in the mind of G. Willow Wilson would be to redress the balance of oppressor and oppressed. That is the only way which you can make a positive difference. And so Wonder Woman had to stop in the middle of this war and think about that question and try to answer the question of which side she would be on before she actually did anything that would be considered positive, and therefore before she made any actions that were going to have any impact whatsoever. So again, this character had to stop and ask questions and think about the social and political aspects of what she was going to do before she actually went into action. So, how does this kind of storyline destroy the traditional idea of hero? Well, let's go back to Daredevil on the roof. Daredevil would see a mugging occurring and he would just jump into action. Why would he do this? Because most people would express it in this way. He has such a keen sense of justice that when he sees an injustice occurring, like this mugging, he literally jumps off a rooftop and will put his body between the mugger and the person being mugged and put himself in physical danger because he just cannot stand to see this injustice happen. And again, all of that is an expression of his keen sense of justice. And where does Daredevil get this keen sense of justice? Well, it's in his backstory. You look at his entire life, and he spent his life developing this keen sense of justice. You know, he listened to his father, who told him not to be a bum and to make something better of himself, and his father telling him, you gotta study, try to use your head. And then after that, he had to go through the school of hard knocks, losing his father, and then losing his eyesight, and then he went through his religious education phase by being raised by nuns in an orphanage, and after that he became a student and studied law, and during that time he was always sticking up for people, trying to put bullies in their place. So during his entire life he was honing this sense of justice to a fine point where when he actually sees an injustice, he has to throw himself into the situation automatically without thinking about it because he just can't stand to see this injustice happen. So when we look at that, does that fit with the traditional idea of a hero? It certainly does, because the traditional idea of a hero is to be a paragon of virtue. And what is justice? Well, justice is one of the virtues. And to say someone is a paragon of virtue would be using the older language to say what we just said about Daredevil. He is someone with a keen sense of justice. So he has a keen sense of this virtue of justice. He is a paragon of this virtue of justice. And how does one develop this virtue of justice, or any of the other virtues? Well, it all comes from an assumption that there is a truth. Not like G. Willow Wilson said, that everybody has their truths. No, there is a truth. And that truth is what reality is. Now, some people believe that reality is both physical and spiritual. Some people think that reality is just physical, but you look at reality, what is reality. And so what is true. And so you use that truth to develop a sense of right and wrong. Because if you act in accord with reality, you are doing right. And if you act against reality, you are doing wrong. And so this is what everything is centered around. This is what a person's life is made up of. A person's life is made up of their choices. Every person has their own individual will. They exercise their will to make a choice, either to choose to do what is right or to do what is wrong. And when a person constantly chooses the right thing to do, it becomes a virtue. And when the person constantly chooses the wrong thing to do, it becomes a vice. And after a while, if you develop that virtue of, let's say, justice again, well, it becomes easier and easier for you to actually employ justice in your life because you have that virtue and it has been developed to a fine point. And so, yes, you can just jump into a situation and know what is going on because you can make the right and the just decision about it because you have developed the virtue of justice. Actually, that choosing itself is another virtue. It is the virtue of prudence because prudence is correct decision making. But you'll notice that all of this that we've just talked about is centered around the free choice of individuals and how it shapes their life. In the older terms, your life is just made up of that, your free choices. But if you look at this other model, if you look at this identity politics model that characters like the champions are employing, well, they don't believe that at all. They believe that, yes, people have a free will and that they can choose, but that choice doesn't really have any impact on your situation in life. The only thing that really has an impact on your situation in life is whether you are born into the class of the oppressor or the oppressed. And it is the social and political institutions around you that promote this oppression that are controlling all of the events in your life. And so if someone has a good life, it's not because they made good decisions. It is because they are employing the institutions of oppression, and that's the only reason they have a good life. If someone has a bad life, it is only because they are being used by these institutions that have systematically oppressed them. It has nothing to do with your free choices whatsoever. So the entire idea that they are promoting with these heroes and how they act and how they have to stop and think about the social and political aspects of what they are about to do is stating that the only way that you can make a difference whatsoever is through understanding and dealing with these social and political institutions. Dealing only with your free choices gets you nowhere because that doesn't actually impact your life or anything else in their ideology. But the whole point is, if you look at the old idea of a hero, that hero as a paragon of virtue, well, virtue is dependent upon the idea that, yes, your free choices generated by your free will are the things that actually constitute what you make yourself to be and how your life develops. And if you get rid of that idea that your free choices do so, then you get rid of the idea of virtue itself. If you get rid of the idea of virtue itself, you certainly get rid of the idea of anybody being a paragon of virtue. And if you get rid of that idea and the idea of hero is built upon a person being a paragon of virtue, then you literally destroy the idea of hero itself. And so, what is G. Willow Wilson stating here in this article? What is she doing in the creation of these characters and the writing of these stories that she does for Marvel and DC? Well, she's targeting young people and saying to them, that old idea of hero, that's archaic. Everybody needs to abandon that. You can't actually make any difference in the world or in your life by thinking about these old ideas of what a hero is. And after stating that through her characters, she goes on to try to convince her audience that the only way that you can make any positive change whatsoever, either in the world or in your own life, is to follow the political ideology that she and Marvel and DC now put at the center of almost every story that they publish. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. Alright, I'll see you later. Bye.